Hello and welcome to this week's instalment of Nucleus Investment Insights. We have a special guest this week in entrepreneur, technology leader and this year author, Jeff Booth. Jeff Booth is a visionary leader who has lived at the forefront of technology change for 20 years. He led Build Direct, a technology company that aimed to simplify the building industry for nearly 2 decades through the dot-com meltdown, the 2008 financial crisis, and many waves of technological disruption. In 2015, he was named BC Technology Industry Association's Person of the Year, and in 2016, Goldman Sachs named him among its 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs. Earlier this year, Jeff released his first book, The Price of Tomorrow: Why Deflation Is The Key to an Abundant Future, with an aim to help illustrate how exponential technological evolution, when managed well, can be a positive force on society. And just a quick reminder that before we get started, to subscribe on YouTube and click the notification bell to be notified of when we go live or have a new webinar to watch, or follow us on your preferred podcast platform. So join myself, Tim Fuller, and Nucleus Wealth's Head of Investments, Damien Klassen, as we dive into The Price of Tomorrow with Jeff Booth. I hope you enjoy. Today on the show, we have, among other things, entrepreneur, Canadian, optimist, family man, skier, tennis, volleyball and hockey player, visionary, introvert, and now author of a new book entitled The Price of Tomorrow: Why Deflation Is The Key to an Abundant Future. Jeff Booth, welcome to Nucleus Investment Insights.
Great, thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show. So we thought, just to get started, it'd be wonderful if you could share with our audience the driving forces or reasons behind why you felt that you needed to write the book and release it at the start of this year.
Pretty simple. I looked at the world unfolding, or how it was going to unfold in front of us, and looked at my kids and saying they're not going to grow up in the same world that I grew up in, with the same opportunities, same chances. The world's going to look like a very different place. And I grew tired of people not being able to connect the dots to what was really happening around them. So most people were talking about the second order effects, the wealth inequality, which were all predictable out of what was happening. So I got tired of talking about it, and I decided to write a book about it.
Fantastic. It was a terrific book, and look, we've got plenty of topics to run through today. I'll hand over to Damien maybe to just get us going, but
yeah, well, I guess so. So maybe you can give us just a quick background, I suppose, on the book, just for readers who haven't read it, just to give us, I guess, to get involved in terms of the what the key concepts are, because I sort of wanted to dig a fair bit deeper into some of the issues, but I think for people that haven't read the book, it would be great to have a little bit more context on deflation versus inflation and the technology arguments you present within the book.
Sure. At the highest level, and this is the point that really matters, so you could sum it up into a pretty simple concept. Technology is deflationary, and it's exponentially deflationary. In fact, every business uses technology to remove labor costs, right, to make things more efficient. So it doesn't seem that illogical that technology should be driving things cheaper and cheaper. And that is what is happening with technology. In fact, every single person when you look at your Google searches or your phone and the amount of abundance that you get with technology today for a nominal cost, that's exactly what's happening with technology. But fighting that force, and the more important thing is fighting that force, as we've always lived in an inflationary monetary policy, where things get more expensive, we get higher incomes over our lives. We pay back debt with cheaper money tomorrow, and our assets rise in price. And so governments, there's these two giant forces competing against each other today. One, technological deflation, and the other giant force is a money printing machine by governments trying to make prices go up. And every single other subsequent event, from polarization to wealth inequality, is all a function of that fight. And in the end, there is nothing that governments are going to do are going to win that fight. We will have technological deflation. And if you actually look into the root of it, that's actually a really good thing. But it changes all the rules that we're used to. And it's a hard thing for humanity to understand when a rule change, when a structural change happens that is so prevalent.
Excellent. So, yeah. So with that background, I guess I've got I wanted to sort of drift into some of these, some of the chapters you had on your book, and talk through some of the issues that I find quite interesting. But I thought I might start maybe with a little bit of the history. And I guess I've sort of always had this sneaking suspicion in the back of my mind, and it's you see stuff written on it every now and again. But the question about how much of the 1970s inflation, where inflation really got out of control, and we needed to, and sort of, I guess there was this endemic view sort of put into people's heads that inflation was going to rise, and therefore they needed to ask for wage rises that then sort of ended back in prices rising, and that sort of continual how inflation got embedded. And I guess the question for me, is that a lot of that does seem to stem from oil prices and that sort of ripple effects of oil prices sort of flowing into the rest of the economy as we're sort of talking about this scarcity of inflation comes from people too much money sort of chasing too few goods, and at the time it was sort of an artificially managed situation to limit the amount of oil available. And I just wanted to see your thoughts on in terms of what you've been looking at in terms of that 1970s inflation.
So there's a whole bunch of things in a 10 bundle. If you take any time period, like you did the 70s, and you take a global system, right? So for a long time, effectively, what U.S. couldn't pay their debts from the Vietnam War on the gold standard against Bretton Woods, and they exported their problem around the world. And went off the gold standard, and then you had a fiat currency that everything was pegged to, that created a whole bunch of perverse incentives around the world. So oil is a piece of that. There's energy overall is a piece of that. I think before we go to some of these things, I think it's really just important to go through the concept, because this is such a foreign concept to probably most of your listeners that it really deserves a deeper dive. Deflation is if you just said forget what you know and forget what you've been taught, and just what is deflation. And all deflation is when goods and services go down in price versus your money, right? And that seems like a pretty good thing. We would all want goods and services going down in price. Seems like a pretty good thing. Inflation is the exact opposite, right? Goods and services go up in price and your money is worth less. And so it's not good or bad on either side of that coin. It's different winners and different losers. If you run an inflationary environment and your assets go up in price, and essentially you can borrow a whole bunch of money, and then pay back that money with cheaper dollars tomorrow, it's a good thing for asset owners. On the corresponding side, if you kept a whole bunch of cash, your cash becomes more valuable. So just different winners and losers. And so when you build a system that requires inflation, and inflation is a monetary policy, it's driven from central banking policy that creates inflation and makes your dollar is worth less. You kind of have to ask yourself, if governments that came and said, instead of inflation targeting, we're trying to drive 2% inflation, if they came out and said, we're trying to destroy the value of your currency with everything we have, you might think about it differently.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. The other way, though, is if you sort of take the view that if wages are going up by more than inflation, then my goods are getting cheaper in terms of what are getting paid. So in a way, high inflation is is better for wage earners who assuming wages are beating inflation.
So if you look at what happened in 1970, the exact opposite happened. That's actually what's that happened. So the upper income earners, the people with the assets, the assets run away in price and value, but the wages don't go up close to what inflation goes up. So your real wages are going down all the time. That's why 50% of the world. That's why 1% of the world owns more than 50% of the wealth.
Yeah. So okay. So let's drill into that a little bit then. So in terms of the but do you think the disinflationary environment we've had where inflation's been falling, so that's been better for asset owners rather than wage earners as well? So I guess what you're saying is, in which scenario then do wage earners actually end up in a better position than asset owners? So is it high inflation, low inflation, deflation?
Deflation, because your wages are worth more and more and more.
Yeah. Okay. Let me think about that one for a minute, because I think there's I guess the way I'm looking at it in terms of if we're talking about nominal amounts. So if nominal wages stay still, which they tend not to. People are very averse to wages going backwards.
I'm not. By the way, Damien, and keep in mind, I'm actually not saying what people are adverse to or not. I'm just talking about facts. You're right. From saying, if you said, are you going to get everybody to accept a deflationary environment today where the wages might go down? No. So you're right, and they won't, because they can't make. That's why it said it turns your knowledge upside down, because they can't see. Wait, prices might fall faster than my wages decline, and that could be a good thing because my real purchasing goes up.
Yep,
that's what would happen. But will people see it? They won't see it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where I'm coming to from this whole thing is, we have this economy that's built, and it's sort of jumping a little bit towards the end, but we have this economy that's built to say we've got a pie big enough to feed everyone, and that pie keeps growing every year. And this deflation basically means that we can grow and technological innovation means our pie is getting bigger and bigger. And now we're just trying to work out what are the rules to make sure everyone gets a fair slice. And we don't end up with some people getting thinner and thinner slices. And
the point is, running the existing, so if you go back to the concept, technological deflation is exploding, it's moving faster and faster, and that removes jobs, right? And nobody would argue with that, right? And it reduces cost. Trying to stop that is creating inflation. Just try to stop the removal of jobs and what's the natural order of things.
Yes.
And trying to stop that is concentrating all the wealth. It's why the monopolies are so big. It is why the 0.1% own so much of the world's wealth. It's because if you own assets and people are destroying the currency value, asset owners win, right? If you own a house, everybody in the right mind knows that China is going to devalue their currency again because they have to retain jobs. And so if you're in China, are you going to try to get your money out of China and put it in Australian real estate? Of course you are, because it's safer than your money in China.
Yep.
Right. And so that game is being played all around the world with currency debasement, and the owners of the assets, real estate, other assets that can't be that are perceived stores of value against that destruction of currency are climbing at a crazy rate because of. At the same time, technology is if you look at actually the S&P in the U.S. and the top 5 technology companies, how fast the printing of money just went straight to those companies, right, in market cap, because everybody knows that technology companies are the winners, so that it's a perceived store of value against that, as other companies are trying to drive technology to be able to compete.
Yes.
Jeff, just a quick one on that online monopoly piece. You obviously go into this in some detail in your book. Look, for mine, obviously they are creating this abundance of either information or better services or better experiences. But do you feel that there's a risk of these being broken up, like these mega Goliath sort of essentially assets, where obviously, as you say, that naturally, if there's money available, people go into it because they are the clear winners in the space. But will there be a point where they'll eat the world essentially? Do you think there's a risk that they'd ever need to be broken up or controlled in some way?
So there's lots to talk about that right now, but the geopolitical risk of breaking them up is a bigger force than so in the geopolitical risk in breaking them up. If you break up Amazon, Google, Facebook, then you cede AI superiority to China.
Yes, so that's actually let's hold the AI for a little bit, because I actually wouldn't mind just doing a little bit more on the sort of wages versus this idea that I guess nirvana for central banks is that yes, you've got a little bit of inflation, but you've actually got wage inflation growing faster than that. So people are whatever it is, inflation of 2% and wage inflation of 4%, so that people are getting gradually better over time, and that's the real one of the problems we're having a hard time getting back to, because wage growth has been so low. And I guess that was sort of that.
And just keep on that question for a second. Why is wage growth low? You'll come back to the principle, because technology is removing the jobs faster, and if somebody tries to push up their wages too fast, you remove that job faster with technology.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly, and then the next one is I guess I was trying to get a gauge if you've got a feeling for how much of this is this regulatory arbitrage idea of that the Ubers and the sort of gig economy type ones is really just getting around some of the minimum wage laws and the labour hire laws and things like that.
I don't think it's anything to do with the gig economy. I think that it's way bigger than that. And so yes, there are people that are arbitrage labor laws, but here's the thing: technology is borderless. I did a House of Commons Finance Committee call, and we were on, and the House of Commons in Canada, the government of Canada is using Zoom, and I'm on a Zoom call, and there isn't one job located in Zoom in Canada, but it's because the technology is borderless. And these things, the new superhighways are information superhighways, and they scale around the world. And people use, and whether I hire somebody from, but I have a company in India, one of my companies that builds technology. I haven't been there obviously since COVID. I go three times a year. It's like nothing ever happened. We build technology for companies all over the world. And you can do it remotely. You always have been able to with the tools today. So
and COVID's accelerating that process, isn't it?
Exactly. And so if you use Uber as an example, of, say, on the gig economy, I don't love that business model, because the next step for Uber is what's going to happen. What do they have to do, or what are other companies doing? They're removing the driver. And when the driver's removed, what value does Uber give?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So, I wanted to go a whole bunch into that AI and sort of talk through that. But the other part I wanted to check in terms of just sort of this whole view about wages versus inflation is that most economies are increasing the amount of services, particularly Western economies, and the question is that going to start slowing this the effect of technology? Is that is there, I guess, is this not an exponential line, but it's more like an S curve sort of sitting under the surface, and we just happen to be at the really steep part of that S curve, and as more and more of the economy ends up being services, there's less of an effect on technological innovation.
I don't think so. I think if you looked at the service industry, it looks the same from a technology backbone. I think that the same thing will happen in service industry.
Yeah. So, but I guess typically you'd sort of say, I guess you can go through certain ones and go, there's whether it's healthcare. I suppose there's a does it mean we end up with more people? Yeah. Where are the so within the services there's there's a healthcare part, and I suppose you can see where some robotics will increase in terms of that. And the question is, does that mean you grow your carers base then, and you can see the transport sector, education, and then there's sort of like the I guess personal services, whether it's haircuts and massages and those types of factors as to whether the bigger the economy grows in those areas.
So Damien, I'm going to use an analogy to be able to answer that so people can see it. Because I've seen this for 20 years in technology, that every single industry that technology attracts, people say, oh, so it can't happen here because of X, because mine's protected. And the base layer of everything is technology today, and it's moving more faster and faster. And so the same thing happened in music when music was annihilated really by the platforms, and then the bookstores said, well, no, books will never be, because people love the experience of coming to the bookstore.
Yep.
And then that goes, and then toy stores did the same thing, and then it just moved up the stack, and that's happening at a rate everywhere, and every single industry, regardless, thinks they're immune from it, and sees the same thing. It's the same pattern across it just comes for one after another, and so there's no reason that services will be excluded from that.
Yeah. Okay. So onto the so you spend a fair bit of time talking about exponential growth within your book, and I guess the question is, so in your view, is this deflation? Is this an accelerating deflationary force? So, given the speed of growth in technology, and is this problem getting worse over time?
Yes, and so problem or opportunity. We'll get to the opportunities afterwards, but
yeah.
But so the
let's call it problem for central banks.
Yeah. Exactly. Problem for central banks means this. And it's better to do this I used it in the book, but I've asked this question, I'll say on this podcast, probably to over 10,000 people in audiences around the world, and no one gets the answer. And if I fold a piece of paper on itself and I continue to fold that piece of paper 50 times, how thick is the piece of paper? People say, well, you can only fold it 7. Yes, that's true. Just imagine, suspend disbelief and say you could fold it 50 times. How thick is the piece of paper? Most people answer 2 inches. Some people, very few people answer to the roof, and some people, like one in an audience, says to the moon. The answer goes to the sun. A normal 8.5 piece of paper folded 50 times moves to the sun. And the point isn't to trick an audience, because now that your listeners know the answer, they'll, oh, I know the answer, great. The point is, human beings can't understand exponential patterns. Otherwise, you would have a way higher number of people predicting the right answer. So nobody gets the answer unless you've heard it before, or you do the math to understand how far that is. So if you compare that to Moore's law, how fast technology is moving, we are on fold 33 today. And fold 33, if fold 33 is say from Boston to Detroit, but now we're in the steep steps. So technology isn't moving faster; it's moving so much faster. So that means in 18 months to 2 years, that all of the technology gains we've seen over the last 50 years will double again. And so we're looking backwards at the last fold instead of looking at what happens to the next fold. And the same thing why we misunderstand how impactful technology is in the beginning. Because in the beginning, the first paper fold, the second paper fold, it looks like nothing. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't move. But in the later folds, it just changes everything. So now connecting that and now that statement, what we were just talking about, to central banks, what that means is to fight technological deflation in the last 20 years, to pretend we've had growth against the natural underlying trend, that governments have had to print $185 trillion of new money, debt or new money, or the So now there's $250 trillion of debt in the world before COVID, running an $80 trillion global economy. And 185 trillion of that has been created in the last 20 years, essentially to stop what's happening underneath the technological deflation. And if you assume that the pattern is exploding, like it's getting more and more, we're in the big steps, the number has to go up exponentially on the other side to drive an inflationary environment. So out of that landscape, you can see what's happening in COVID right now and the amount of monetary easing around the globe that is just staggering how much monetary easing there is. It's just filling that hole, trying to stop deflation from happening. And so, but it's going to have to go up exponentially. And by going up exponentially, then the have-nots get hurt exponentially because of the same thing, because the asset owners win, and everybody else gets their pocket picked as you drive that experiment. And so there's, at the end of the day, there's nothing that governments can do to stop what they can destroy the currencies, and you can run through hyperinflation before you get to deflation. But in the end, we're going to go to a deflationary environment. And if the government stopped printing today, if they even slowed printing today instead of accelerated printing, you would see a collapse and unwind of this financial system like you've never seen before. The 30s would look like a walk in the park.
Yeah. So let's get into the monetary policy in a minute, but I want to pick a little bit more on this exponential growth, because this is something that sort of quite near and dear to our investing hearts as well. And you know, I spend a lot of time looking at industries that are reaching the crossover point, where, you know, you speak about that exponential growth, and as you said, the first fold of the paper. And so let's say we're talking solar energy, for example. You know, the first fold of the paper, when it's, you know, hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a solar cell, seems irrelevant relative to the prices. But that continual improvement and that continual dropping of price, you know, takes 50 years, and with just these small changes, which seem relevant, but then all of a sudden it gets pretty close to the price of coal-fired power plants or gas-fired, and the next thing you know, we're below that level, and now all of a sudden, you know, the most important factor for me for energy prices over the next 20 years is the price of solar and the price of batteries, and so. Yeah, we'll throw up a chart for listeners just to sort of show some of our sort of rough figures with this whole idea that, you know, coal and oil and other gas and other energy sources are on this scarcity curve where the price rises as it gets harder to pull them out, whereas solar and batteries are on this technology curve. So, you know, you've sort of written a bit about that. I mean, are you thinking this? That we have reached the crossover point, or we're close to the crossover point in terms of solar plus batteries versus?
Yeah, your data will show it, and that's the point. So all of these things, it's not just one part of an industry. So if you think about the what I just talked about, that exponential curve, meaning it's exponentially deflationary. Add energy to that mix, and energy is the number one input of everything we do, right? And because there is no life without energy. And so the entire race for protection of fossil fuels around geopolitical war machine, everything else, was really a race for lower cost energy, because if you didn't have the lowest cost energy, your economy suffered. And so today, what you're seeing is you have solar and batteries that is on par with the cheapest energy sources, and it's getting cheaper every year. So now there's going to be this race into solar and energy that could bring prices eventually to almost free for energy. And how can the number one input on all of the cost of everything else not have a deflationary impact on the economy? Right?
Absolutely.
So,
I should actually do sorry, you keep going.
But keep going on that and say, because that's the same thing that, why is that a bad thing? Right? Like if my energy price keeps going down, isn't that a good thing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think
for me, my family, the world, everything else, it's clean, it's free, or it's almost free. Isn't that a good thing?
Sure. I guess I guess what central banks would probably argue though is there's a difference between the real cost falling and the nominal cost, and that's where. But I want to save that for the end actually, because I think there's a whole section that I sort of want to discuss in terms of solutions on that. Because but on this crossover part, I guess the thing I'm interested very much on the energy side, and I should do a shout out as well to a prior guest we had. David Morgan wrote a book, Energy Wealthy, which is very similar to a lot of your theories, but he's sort of basing a lot of this on saying there's energy sort of like the unit of a lot of things in society, and so as energy falls, then all these other costs have to fall as well. I've been sort of trying to pick the brain on, over time, if you look back 50 years ago, there was a certain amount of energy people would use in a house, and then as time went on, we started adding washing machines and dryers and air conditioning and heating, and I sort of looking at the typical household spend on energy, and it seems certainly in places now that it's the actual amount of energy is starting to fall, though, as we get more, they've already got air conditioners and all these other factors. And as now you get a more efficient air conditioner, you take out the one you put in 20 years ago and you put a more efficient one in, or you change your washing machine and the one you got now is more energy efficient, is that sort of almost lends to more deflation in terms of it being, if I've got both the price of energy falling and actually the amount of energy I'm using is the same or even falling because everything's getting more energy efficient. I just wanted to see whether you had any thoughts sort of going forward, sort of besides say electric cars, about any particular big energy use that could come to households that you see that would actually increase people's energy use.
I don't think so. I think the same thing that you said is happening to washing machines and everything else. Now, global, you know from my book, and I cover this extensively. As economies emerge and you're a stronger economy, you use more energy. So the amount of energy, and that makes sense because there's more prosperity. You buy more washing machines, you buy more things, and so countries with higher GDP use more energy, and so there's lower energy countries that are going to be higher energy countries. In overall, but the technology underpinning both the solar declining prices and keep declining from here gives an advantage to some of those countries where the sun is shining all the time, and they similar to in Japan, they didn't have to build telephone lines everywhere; they went straight to cell phone. In Alibaba grew really fast in China versus e-commerce in the U.S. because you had in U.S. you had a big retail footprint that had to be destroyed first, and then China you didn't. So there's a whole bunch of countries around the world that are going to jump step the old fossil fuel energy infrastructure and move straight to solar.
Yeah, and you particularly see, say, India, for example, not having to build a nationwide grid of energy, but rather just ending up with solar panels and batteries in local areas.
Totally. So some of the innovation, if you carry on in that, and if some of those countries move to that faster, some of the best innovation around that will come from those countries.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the energy side. The other one I find interesting, and it's more from lack of knowledge, but the 3D printing. You speak a bit about that, and it seems to me again that's another one where the cost when it first came out was astronomically high, and so it wasn't really a disruptor on industry. Then it sort of it fell quite rapidly, and it reached a crossover point for prototyping a little while ago in terms of saying if I'm designing a new part for a new washing machine or something like that, then yes, it is better or it's often better to print it on a 3D printer because it means I don't have to set up the casts and the molds and all these other factors that we might have needed to just to try something out and see if it works. But it's still been for most products, it's still better to have a mechanical process to produce it. I guess what I'm wondering in terms of the crossover point, and I don't know how much you've looked at this, but at what stage you get to the point of where having a 3D printer will be cheap enough that something breaks in my house, a part breaks on my washing machine, that I can print something off and look at the manual and put that in, using my home 3D printer. Seems to be quite a long way away, but I don't know if you're obviously I look closely in exponential growth and all that. So
it's not nearly as far as away as you think. And here's the thing: when you just look at 3D printing, and if you go and say what's happening in metals, glass, carbon fiber, and some of how fast that's accelerating and what's printed now, you'd blow your mind. A good friend of mine just printed a piece for our boat to make the wave bigger, a wedge for the boat. That piece would cost $800. He printed on a $1,500 printer for $3.62.
Wow!
Right now, and so this is just not widely known yet, and it hasn't hit the point besides prototyping. Mind you, over 70% of plane parts are 3D printed now, so it's moving into industry really fast, and from industry, it's going to move into consumer after that. But the value from when this happens as this happens, typically what the value capture is orthogonal to how people think. And why this is important is, what is the value capture from Google, right? Why are they able to create so much money in Google? What do they have?
The data and the information about what people are looking for.
And why do they have that data?
Because people go to them when they're looking for stuff.
And how did they get that? Effectively, what they did is they aggregated data from supply, so supply could find buyers for nothing, and because it was free for all of us to go there. And we never go to page 452. We go to what Google says is its first page. And we look there. So more and more competition from supply gave more data to an AI algorithm that gets better and better with the data. And so you're right. That's what happened. But if you take 3D imaging, what will be the value? So in 3D printing, what will be the value? It's the same thing. It's the data. It's just a 3D image that once you collect that data, you could make a penny on it around the world and make a lot of money. And as people print it around the world. And then as that happens, more and more people will race in to provide information that can be printed anywhere. We'll have a competition of more and more data to be the best information that'll aggregate exactly. You'll be able to print things for free. It'll look like, besides the cost of the 3D printer and the stuff, it'll look like Google.
Yeah. Well, so I guess mine from an investment perspective, the companies I'm looking to avoid on this front is companies that do have a big business in the aftermarket stuff. So it's like saying, we sell a product and we discount our product a lot, but then we make it all back because everyone needs parts and everyone needs
like the auto parts is a perfect prime example. But just so you know, that'll be auto part machine parts. That'll be the first way. But it'll go everywhere.
Yeah, that's right. So okay, so the message is from 3D printing coming a lot sooner. So let's do this cars and AI and all that type of stuff, because that's sort of where you spend a long time talking about these, and this is another one we sort of track we have a similar thing to what we've got on the rooftop solar, except we try and track how far people have to drive in electric cars to make electric cars worthwhile. And it's sort of a few years ago, it was like 100,000 kilometers a year, and that meant it was, for a taxi it was worth it, but for the ordinary person it wasn't, and it's sort of falling back to sort of 80-odd thousand at the moment. But which is still much further than most people drive, so it doesn't really make electric cars worthwhile. But as soon as you hit driverless cars, all of a sudden you get rid of the driver and the taxi, which is the biggest cost, and all of a sudden the costs are you basically, driverless cars look like a similar cost to public transport at the moment. And so I guess I'm just interested in seeing, you've got some ideas. You spoke a lot about Uber there, and just who ends up with the pricing power in terms of this, it seems to me that if I'm getting a bus or if I'm getting a tram or some sort of, or a taxi, like I don't really care if it's a Ford or if it's a Holden or if it's a Mercedes. There's sort of a certain limit to how much brand power actually gets carried, and whether whether the car companies might not actually be the ones who end up with the pricing power. I guess your thoughts on who ends up with the pricing power in driverless car situations?
It'll look like a monopoly. It'll look like and some of those monopolies will be regional, but they'll look like a monopoly down to the data. Because if you think about, so if you look at it from an investor standpoint, if you look at any one of the car companies and their projections over the next 5 years, what you'll see is rising numbers of cars needed being bought, and you'll see it on a straight line going up. Right, every company saying, "Here's how many cars based on how many cars we had in the past."
Yeah,
all of that is based on a 6% utilization rate. We only use our cars 6% of the time, and most families have 2 cars, and they sit in the driveway and then they sit in the parking lot at the office, and so the entire cities are designed around parking, the peak parking. And then the insurance on those cars, in the U.S., what is it, $450 billion in insurance claims each year, with 99% of that being driver fault.
And expensive parts as well sits behind that. So,
yeah, and so when you think about the change that driverless cars makes, it's not just one change. It's everything. And then the consolidator of the information of driverless cars. If I went and bought a car, and while I wasn't using it, I could rent it back to the fleet and make money on it, but just with a click of a button, I might do that. And access changes ownership. There's no better proof of this than what Amazon did with the cloud, right? Nobody buys their own server farms in a business anymore. They rent access on a cloud because it makes it way more cost effective. So if I only own a car for convenience because I want it when I want it, and I don't want somebody else to say I don't. But if there was a driverless car that I could have any car I wanted when I wanted it, the minute I wanted it, and it was way less expensive, I might choose that option. Or if I wanted to own a car, I might choose an option to make money on my car when it's not in use.
Yeah, I think about the jet market as being that similar type of thing in terms of there's not too many people who own jets, or in planes. Sort of saying it's a low usage one, and yeah, even if you're even a lot of people who do have private jets now end up leasing the private jet within a pool of other people.
So then ask yourself, what company wins in that environment? And what does it take to win? And what it takes to win is enough cars utilization so that you can deal with the other side. It's the same thing that all the monopolies have. It's a supply. It's a density of supply, so that you don't have to go to multiple service providers to make sure you have a car when you want.
Well, because it's still going to be very capital intensive for a long while. Because if someone else got a fleet and I want to try and break in, it's pretty hard for me to get enough cars to.
Not necessarily. If Tesla wins the race to this, they could just press a button and to say, do you want to rent your car back to the fleet? Right, and then they could consolidate more cars on it from there. So there's a whole bunch of ways to create value on it, but they don't have to buy all the cars. They could just they could do it through their existing network of people buying their cars.
Yeah, sure. But I guess what I'm saying is, it seems to me as if this is going to be another one of these, as you spoke about, sort of it being look like a lot like monopoly, or at least local monopolies. Is that once you get that first mover advantage, and somebody starts to whoever ends up with the biggest fleet, and everyone starts to use that in a local area, because it's like, yes, I can order this one, and the car will be here in 5 minutes. Whereas if I order from the second company, it might take me 7 or 8 minutes, and if I order from the fifth company, it'll take me 20 minutes. Everyone just starts ordering from that first one, and so that one ends up with more cars, and so it's a bit of a winners take all.
And Damien, absolutely. And here's the thing that a lot of investors miss on technology companies and network effects. Some of them now, and it's also been overused because not all of them have strong network effects. But if you can design something around strong network effects, the key to capturing the entire market, the monopoly, is all of the supply. And so if if you increase your price too soon, you prohibit supply from joining, and somebody else wins.
Yep.
And so in some technology companies, you want to have them grow at all scale, so they aggregate all supply, because then the take rate is higher on the other side. And a lot of investors miss that. That's actually what creates the value in Uber. In Amazon. That's what creates the value in Google. That's what creates value in Facebook. It's all the same thing. Airbnb, all the same thing. And then WeWork doesn't work like that. It's a bad business, and so people mistake that network effect to something else. But there are certain businesses that you want to go all in and make sure you win.
Yes, and that accelerates the changeover as well, doesn't it? Because you're basically saying, here's a company that's willing to take losses, and it's say it's an Amazon, willing to run losses for years and years and years, which mean more people start buying online because it's cheaper earlier than offline, and it actually sort of. Whereas if they were trying to make a profit from day one, not only, as you said, just give a chance for somebody else to come in, but it also means the existing players get to keep their existing business models for a bit longer because they.
I was really close to both companies. I hired senior execs from both. And one of the very senior people at Google said to me, it was hard to believe that they said to me, that they showed me Amazon's profits, which I was well aware of, and said, how could it be priced here in the stock market? And I said, because what they're doing is they're going to take all your advertising revenue, and they have better data because they know the point of entry of all of the retail stores that are advertising on your site to be able to to drive people to their stores. And once they have the data of where all of the delivery mechanism is as well, then they just add advertising and they take all that revenue from you.
Yeah, we were having that exact same argument at our stock meeting this morning, just over the relative value of somebody who's looking at an ad on Facebook, where they're not actually there to buy something; they're there to see their friends and watch cat videos, versus Google, where quite often they are actually looking for the thing, and versus Amazon, where they're actually out shopping. And so, yes, I'm ready to be sold to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, very interesting. Okay, so then my next step, and this is my take again on exponential growth, is that we have the capability for people to fly around places and in terms of transport, but we have a lot of crashes in 2 dimensions, and so putting people into 3 dimensions is a pretty bad sign. There'll be a lot more deaths, and so. But having said that, if you've got a driverless car who's solved the problem in 2 dimensions, or I guess 3, if you think about it, we're on a flat 2-dimensional surface, plus you got the time surface, then moving to 1 extra dimension in terms of the being able to move up and down seems to be not that far of a step away. I guess your thoughts on exponential growth?
So that would already be able to be effectively handled over the same technology stack, right? What is the technology stack doing? Like, what's Tesla doing? They're visualizing the world, right? So a fire hydrant doesn't move very often. Once it's been imaged and everything else on a road, they're image capturing everything, and it's just getting better and better and better. And then now you only have to compare the moving things and what's changed.
Yep.
That same technology stack would work perfectly in the air too. It's not designed just for the road, right? So it's imaging, and so or you could say, and that might be a little bit of a stretch, but it's not a big stretch. It's not a big step from taking that imaging to doing 360 imaging to be able to provide the same thing in the air.
Yeah. Yep. And now, and it's still on this AI topic. So you spoke in your book. You talk a lot about deflation and how, for example, in medical imaging, the AI is now better than most humans in terms of identifying things. I guess so that does seem to me as if that's a deflationary force very much for doctors. I guess I'm just trying to work out within that sector. Does that mean that the companies in the sector, though, might still be there's still a scope? The people who are collecting this data and using the data to work it out. Where's the value capture? I suppose within that AI in the healthcare sector.
Yeah. So healthcare sector is going to be completely upended, and I would say this. So the big monopolies, including Apple and Google, are making giant inroads into doing it right now. Some of this AI is being driven from those companies. And if I think about my Apple Watch, it knows more about me than my doctor. And why I say that is it knows my heart rate all the time. It knows my sleep patterns. It know it knows when I'm exercising. It knows a whole bunch. If they asked me to give my genome and they could give me better predictions, not just, hey, you should go see a doctor because you're going to have a heart attack, but they could add different predictions because they had more information. I might give it to them if I trust the privacy of their network. And AI is created through error correction on giant data sets. It just it keeps on cycling. So the more data sets you have, and the more data you have with data, the more things you see. Human beings need to go really narrow and practice something really narrowly to be able to error correct that. That's why we go to school in a narrow discipline. That's why we do sports stars get better and better in one discipline typically, and the more we practice, the better we get. What's happening in your brain is you're developing neural connections to learn that thing really, really well, so you can see things that other people can't see. That's what's happening with AI. But it's happening at a rate that is you can't even comprehend against way more data sets. So as human beings, we get caught in that narrow silo, and we miss the big picture because of the narrowness of our. So I used the example in the book. Elton John doesn't come out from playing piano and be the best quarterback in the NFL, and so that narrowness, we have to pick, and computers don't have to pick. Right? They get better. As you collect more and more data, they are able to see more patterns that we couldn't see. That's what's happening. And so it's reasonable to expect. Another thing I said in the book, and one of the top AI researchers in the world said to me, out of this comment, he said, "You have a way of saying things that just that make it all make sense." But human intelligence is just error correction. Right? We learn why we read, why people are listening to your podcast, why we build our knowledge on other people's knowledge, and we continually build upon that knowledge. And reading books keeps, and then building on that knowledge of generational learnings, we error correct our knowledge, and we get better and better. That's what computers are doing, and they're doing it at a rate that's unbelievable. It's exactly the same thing.
Yes.
Just touching on that sort of healthcare theme, and you mentioned there with the Apple iWatch there, Jeff, a buddy of mine actually works in our national broadband sort of connection service, was saying that their plans are that the most connected room in the house in the future will probably be a toilet. On that basis, it's just it's going to be a big collection service, but that obviously once again is a data entry point, and obviously will potentially yield some benefits, I guess.
But again, we choose to use. Effectively, think about all the services that you use and all the monopolies you use, whether it's Amazon, Google, everything else. You're actually celebrating deflation. You use them because they're bringing you. Then Amazon's lower and lower price, and then they add free movies. And the free movies to this too? They're making a lot of money, by the way. And free movies and everything, and they keep on adding these services, and we're using them. Google's free. Right? We're using them because they're deflationary in nature. Your phone provides you way more power today. It's my guitar tuner, it's my flashlight, it's my camera, it's all of these things I used to buy. Now I get for effectively $50 a month service charge, and that's coming down each year, and I get more and more. That's the point. That's actually so we see it all around us. Yet we don't notice, and the same thing happens when I said we get caught in our little loops of knowledge. We see this all around us, and we don't connect it to the bigger picture that's really happening all around us. That those two things, that deflationary environment that is happening everywhere, that we're celebrating. we're not allowing to be broadly distributed to society because of our inability to see that could be a good thing.
Yes, well, and I think it's probably more. I guess I'd pitch it as saying we've set the rules up in such a way that we're trying to avoid that. But I think probably the big reason for me for those rules is that deflation from a sort of fairness point of view is saying let's say you and I. It's the issue that with deflation, work that was done yesterday is more important than work that's getting done today, and I think that's where I find the real issue in terms of letting deflation take root is that say you help me move my couch today, and I say, yeah, here you go, here's $20 for it, and then we've got this huge deflation, and so tomorrow that it's only $10 to move a couch. Is it all of a sudden you're saying to me, well, I've still got my $20 from yesterday. I want you to move 2 couches for me today, and so it's that point about going well.
But again, do you mean? And I'm going to take you another level up in a second, but argue the other side of that argument. That's kind of what I'm saying. If deflation or inflation isn't bad or good, it's just different winners and losers. So what you're saying is work that was done yesterday should be less valuable than work done today.
Yes.
Why?
Because so now let's pick a longer period of time. Let's say it's 20 years. So.
But here's the point.
Well, it's slightly more important because I guess what I'm saying is if I've done something for you and that's effectively I've done a favor for you yesterday, is saying well if it takes you a long time to cash in that favor, I shouldn't get multiple favors for the fact that it's taken so long to cash it in. I guess that's where I'm
shouldn't, and this is where I wanted to really take this. Technology, it doesn't actually matter what you think or I think or anything else. The facts are really evident in front of us, and technology is deflationary, and we're using technology everywhere to remove barriers, right? So those are the facts, and that means that stopping that from happening robs our time.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about stopping it from happening. I guess this is my distinction is between saying there's definitely going to be deflation in terms of a real figure. It's just more of a question of nominal now in terms of saying. Okay.
But again, so now think about if you try to drive inflation up into that environment. By the way, I wrote about this in the book too. John Maynard Keynes, who people either love if you're a central banker or hate because but he was actually very, very smart and one of the things he missed though is he predicted by 2020 we would have what was it a
15-hour work week or something like that, was it?
15-hour work week.
Yeah.
What changed and it was on the path to a 15-hour work week up until 1971. It was declining. And what changed is going off the gold standard that changed the value of money and governments changing the value of currency underneath that made more and more people work longer and longer and longer to try to save enough money to be able to buy a house or assets that were running away higher and higher in price.
Yes.
To live for their last 10 or 15 years of their life in relative comfort. And so all of our work, effectively what we're doing is we're wasting our time. The most valuable thing in our life is our time. And by running this thing, we're working harder and harder and harder on a mouse wheel to try to chase prices higher that we're artificially creating to be higher in the first place.
Yes, I'm with you on that. But the flip side, though, is people do value having something to do. And that was what, in terms of saying, if I said to everyone, and I think COVID's actually been, to me, it's been a really stark reminder of people saying, like, we've shut down whole economies and just told everyone, stay home, don't go to work. And everyone's still alive and we're getting fed and, there's still hospitals and, there's still things happening. It is a sign that there is a lot of stuff that people do is not necessary to stay alive. And I guess it's a question of saying if we're looking at a society as you're talking about with technological is improving so that you say the minimum the society needs to do 1,000 years ago was, yes, people had to work X amount of hours a week. Otherwise, you're going to die because you didn't get enough food and enough shelter. And nowadays, if as a society as a whole, we probably only need 10, maybe 20% of people to be working in order to provide this, and the rest of it's all now for our wants. I want to have a flat screen TV or watch TV or watch people, music and shows and travel and all these things that aren't really necessary. And so as a society, it's a question of saying, as we get fewer and fewer people needing to produce the goods for us, what do we want the rest of the people doing? Do we want to tell them, no, you can have the time off and don't do anything? And I think if that's the case, we're going to have this massive drug problem because people like having things to do. And I guess my take is
maybe, but maybe not. Maybe the drug problem or some of the other problem is because there's so much people feeling like they can't keep up to the existing system, and they're falling off and they're wondering what to do, and it becomes hopelessness. So, and I guess again, if you would entertain me in this,
yep.
If you've never seen what a system could look like this way, it would be easy to make some mistakes and some biases about what it might look like. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I certainly have. I think we both. I think I certainly agree with you on the problems and the overall bit. And now we're just talking about what are some possible solutions we can.
Totally. And each of those solution sets, the biggest problem with the solution set I propose is the transition to move from one system to another system breaks. But that world is going to break anyways. So continuing on this path, monetary easing, is going to have currency destruction, revolution, and war. That's what it looks like.
Yep.
And so that's our current path. If you increase taxes to be able to pay for UBI and everything else, and you say, okay, we're going to create a whole bunch of money out of nowhere to be able to pay a whole bunch of people who are sitting down but they can't get work, then that also breaks the system because you can't pay for it. Right. So the taxes can't go up high enough to pay for it that in the end run. So it's just a transfer.
Okay, so let's explore that, because I guess what I'm saying is we think we're producing a pie big enough to feed everyone and clothe everyone with, I don't know, let's call it 30% of the population today, but we think that's going to keep falling. So that it'll be 29% in a few years, and then it'll keep drifting away. So maybe in 50 years' time, you can produce enough for everyone to do everything they want for 10%. And the question is, do we want the other 90% to be either unemployed or entertainers or full-time travelers or doing sort of useless stuff? And my take is I'd prefer to see an R&D-led jobs boom where we're saying to people, look, it's really, a lot of the latest technology is actually really hard, and you actually do need to spend a long time studying and sort of get people doing something in R&D as opposed to saying, here's some money, society doesn't need you.
Okay, so let me take that, because I think there's two separate questions or two separate comments on what you just said, but I'll take both. So in one, what I'm saying with UBI is a structural change to a band-aid on the existing system. Looks a lot like communism, where essentially the government reaches in and decides who wins, who loses, and it becomes the market. I am so against that, because the free market, and that's what 60% of our market today is government spending, and it's going up. And so there is no free market price discovery. There is anywhere. It's all just being juiced by central banks around the world. And when you do that, you have a whole bunch of consequences and misallocation of capital. I am 100% against that. I believe in a free market with a strong social safety net. And so in a free market, if you have technological deflation, a free market can only exist when you actually allow things to fail and let the clearing function of markets take place, which hurts some people and not others. But in a deflationary environment, it doesn't change capitalism at all. In fact, the best people will race to where the opportunities are, and they'll move faster, and the allocation of capital to be where the best can do the most help. That's what I advocate for, which plays into what you just said in the research-driven thing. If I was a country right now, and I'm advising right now in Canada, what every country should do is try to win the information superhighway, the digital superhighway. Instead of, you used to build roads and bridges because you got a GDP gain, the initial roads and bridges and jobs, and a longer term gain because that decreased the amount of time people were in traveling and increased the amount of time they were working. So it provided efficiency. And so it was a decent place for governments to apply spending in soft times. What you're saying, which I totally agree with, in any country, is what you should do is you should take as much money today as you could and put that money into digital economy, into advancing how fast this is moving. And then for a country that did that, they would come out the other side stronger relatively than other countries. But if every country did the same thing, you still get to which they will eventually, you still get to the same spot.
So, Jeff, that just sounds like what China's doing while we're letting the US monopolies run the world.
I just love what you just said there, because a lot of people talk about, well, let's just do in the US MMT, or let's do a debt jubilee or something like that. Imagine this, and so it's when I talk to people in the US, they can't see it because they have the currency. But so I use a hypothetical example. Let's say there was this country called China that made up currency and bought assets all around the world, the best assets, and they made up and they just changed the rate of the currency all the time, and then made the debt go away. Do they keep the assets? Right. That's kind of what's happening all over the world with every central bank, right? And so would you trust that currency anymore? And so people believe that a reserve currency can be reserved forever. It is not reserved forever. It is reserved while people trust the rules of engagement. And if you manipulate the rules of engagement, the reserve currency breaks down really quickly. Nobody's going to use nobody. I don't think people are racing around the world to use the Venezuelan Bolivia as a reserve currency because the rules change.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I guess I'm still just thinking through this whole process then. So in your view though, so if you let too much deflation, then debt becomes a problem though as well, doesn't it? Because in terms of saying, okay, I have a good idea of this new product that's going to be fantastic for everyone, but I need to borrow $1 million first in order to do it. But if I've got too much deflation, then I borrow my $1 million. That'll actually be, by the time I've got to pay it off, it'll be the equivalent of $5 million because that'll be staying still, and wages will be falling away and profits will be falling away.
Again, yes, you're right. So that's the transition. If you let deflation happen, that's why central banks are caught in a trap of their own making. They created this, and if you run negative interest rates and low interest rates, people gorge on debt. That's why debt's going up so fast, and you have to keep going, and you need more and more debt to keep going. And so the central banks all over the world are trapped in this, because if you let deflation happen now, that debt has to the real cost of the debt explodes. Banks fail, and it's ugly around the world. It looks like a depression of the 30s. That's what we're trying to avoid. And you're right, but going back to what I said, inflation or deflation. So inflation, the winners are the people who use debt to be able to buy assets and then pay back the debt with cheaper dollars tomorrow. So with deflation, the winners are people who have savings. So what would happen in an environment that we had deflation? You would price it into your economic models. And you would say, does it make sense to take a loan when the true cost of capital in my economic model, let's take solar for an example, we know it's going to drop in price. Am I going to use my savings, which will be truly valued, to buy it? Or am I going to use debt, which, if I look at the lifetime value of the project, you'll just run it in your economic models. It wouldn't change a thing. It just changes where the value comes from.
And do you see a problem though having a system set up to say that as you said, the biggest benefit of the savers. So you're basically saying if you already have money, then you'll be the biggest beneficiary of this system. But if you're out working, and I sort of feel as if trying to incentivize workers to me seems like a best solution for whatever economy you're trying to design is. I want to incentivize the people to go out and do more work tomorrow, rather than saying no, I already did work yesterday. I don't have to do another work for another few weeks, and then I'll drift out again when I feel like it.
So today, the path then that we're on, you would hate the path we're on.
Absolutely, yeah.
The only way that we would get to this is through the path that I proposed. It's the only way that you would get to it. Otherwise, it's just going because the game board is not right now. So if I own I own a bunch of assets. Like I'm one of the winners out of this, right? I own technology companies. I own tons of assets. Rent the assets, because I've owned them for a long time. I can charge rents that are higher, right? And the people that don't own assets have to keep paying higher and higher prices on rent with their labor rates that are going up as fast as the asset prices. Yeah. Why do you think in that environment it's just ripe for a social revolution?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm with you there. I'm just worried that if you end up with a deflationary environment, then it doesn't, it still doesn't solve the problem for a worker who wants to try and get ahead. It's like, what's the best way to get ahead is to have assets. And they go, well, I don't have any assets. It's like,
no. It's exactly the opposite, because those assets would fall precipitously in value. Precipitously. Ask yourself this: what would real estate be around the world? Everybody says real estate always goes straight up. Without $185 trillion of printing, what would real estate be priced at? What would the rents be priced at? It would be more closer to what should be, rather than artificially stimulated. And so in that case, then your wages are worth more. And if you decide to save some of your wages because you can now save, then your cash is worth more. And then you can get into real estate at a lower price. In fact, take this argument and look at what happened in 2008. By manipulating the rules of capitalism and the Fed jumping in and saving all the architects of the problem, they also inadvertently saved people like Trump. Because if you let that system collapse at that time, all of asset owners, price of real estate, price of everything, and all the debt against it would have gone to zero. Right? It would have just collapsed. You would have had a massive depression, and holders of cash would come in and cherry pick assets at prices of pennies on the dollar. Instead, you gifted the architects of the crisis and all of the people with the assets a one-way ticket to win more money. And then,
and as well, you told people, hey, the thing to do is take lots of debt, and if anything goes wrong, we'll bail you out.
Totally. And in a business, you take the same thing in a business. If a government is saying in a business, so let's say I'm running a business, and the government is saying, I'm going to make sure your cash is going to be worth less money next year. I'm going to drive this inflation rate no matter what. I'm going to print money. I'm going to make sure the cash is worth less next year. Isn't the best thing in a business environment to do stock buybacks and make sure you don't have cash on the balance sheet in that environment?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what every CEO will do, because you're designing a system that tells them that your cash. Why would you save cash in a system that the central bank is saying, I'm going to make the cash worth less? It's insane. And so then when any sort of blip happens in the market, they have to rely on government bailouts, or all the jobs go away. And so it's systematic. And it just keeps on. It gets bigger and bigger with every step, because they're not dealing with the real trend that's underneath it, which is technological deflation is driving it all.
Yeah, and so I guess under your view then, so which I'm not against in terms of saying there needs to be a big structural change, but I guess it does sound as if you're of the view that, look, we're pretty much locked into our existing system until things get so bad that we do actually decide to have a break and take a massive break and change something, because the incremental, day by day incentives are for everyone involved just to try and keep this thing afloat for just a little bit longer.
So yeah, the probabilities that we continue down this path are very high. I wrote the book in hopes of creating a debate around why they shouldn't be, but
Yep.
but the probabilities are very high. And then in that, you could see investment strategies that should work or shouldn't work, and yeah, in that whole environment. But realize that, like, take housing as an example. Realize that taxes must go up, or one of two things. Taxes must go up, which which essentially takes economy down, because you're putting more government money into government hands and less into private industry, and you move an economy slower when taxes go up. So taxes must go up to pay for some of what the governments are spending today. And historically, really good stores of value like real estate will be the first to be taxed at different rates. And once you're in it, you can't move it. So you get some in a market like this, there's a whole bunch of things that are going to happen next that you can see the writing on the wall where relative stores of value are going to be and where they're not.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Hey, I just realised I've just had a look at the time. We're an hour and a quarter.
Yeah, touching to it.
Thanks heaps. I mean, I think we could go for another hour. I think because I think we've got very similar views, but with differences over the solutions. But really appreciate your time, and maybe actually, Tim, you've got some info just on.
Yeah, so well, just before we do that, I've just got one question here. We had a handful of questions come in from some listeners, and we sort of advertised that we were speaking to you this week, Jeff. So just one here I might leave you with, if you wouldn't mind. Can capitalism continue to survive when we are entering into an era of high-frequency trading and AI that influences market trading? Markets seem to be lifting off from fundamental reality at present, with all the money printing we've been seeing. Is high-speed trading only going to make things worse?
See, and I believe not capitalism is perfect, but I believe that capitalism is the best route forward. What we're doing today looks nothing like capitalism. That's the problem, and the byproduct is what we're saying. And I don't think it's just in high-frequency trading. I think it's everywhere.
Okay. Actually, reminds me of...
I was just going to say I'll second that, and I think there's a bit of some of these high frequency traders who basically don't lose out because they're just all they're doing is really front running other people's orders is different to quant machines trying to predict sort of asset prices, because the quant machines that try to predict asset prices, you do get it wrong relatively frequently, and they suffer the pain of it. But some of the high frequency ones that basically never make losses because they're just all they're doing is front running other people's orders, they're the ones which looks nothing like capitalism.
Absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of a tweet I saw the other day, which was if aliens landed on Earth today, they'd cut interest rates tomorrow. Sort of wrapped up the thought of the whole thing. But look, yeah, thanks very much for joining us today, Jeff. The book, of course, is called The Price of Tomorrow, Why Deflation Is The Key to an Abundant Future. And we'll, of course, add some links to the show notes for people to check it out and head over to the website. And I think it's available on Amazon as well. Just finally, thoughts for the future and other things that you're working on, just to share with our audience.
So for me, again, the book was I'll never say never, but it was a one-time endeavor. Most of my time is spent on technology companies, and so people could follow me at Jeff Booth on Twitter, or jeffreybooth.com is my personal website, and happy to follow up on any questions from here.
Excellent. All right. Well, look, thanks very much for your time today. Terrific opportunity to chat and run through some serious topics here and some wonderful work. And we look forward to getting you onto the show sometime soon.
Awesome. Great.
Lovely. All the best. So, Damien, a terrific, well over an hour here with Jeff Booth. Very smart guy, definitely a futurist and a forward thinker. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think obviously, we started this talking about his book and deflation, and then it pretty quickly diverted into quite a long discussion about technology and some of the key parts. So from an investor's point of view, I guess the way I look at this is I think Jeff's sort of he's bang on with his diagnosis of the problem in terms of deflation. I think there's when you look at it from an investment perspective, you look at some sectors like, say, the chip manufacturing sector, which is this real section where you've just got that ongoing deflation and ongoing. The chip that was made 3 years ago is worth nothing compared to the chip that's been made just rolled off the line yesterday. And what it means for those companies is they've got this huge sort of capex and R&D spend and this real pressure to keep on evolving and really push to maintain their level. And they're sort of only and they're only as good as their latest hit. And so if you start seeing that spreading into other industries as well, it changes the dynamics of companies within that industry. And so the energy sector is one in particular that's sort of being highlighted for that. But we also spoke about driving, manufacturing through 3D printing, and it just puts companies, some companies in that industry, if they're not in the right place, just puts them on that whole treadmill of just you got to spend lots and lots of money in order to keep your sales to where you were the year before, but you're just hoping for that one great hit that'll give you this massive bonus, but a lot of it's just on the treadmill and really not earning fantastic returns. As opposed to some other industries that really take advantage of that whole network effect, and the technology actually turns that company into a much bigger company in that more. So say your Facebook one, where more people that are using Instagram or Facebook to communicate means that more people will then go onto that because that's where all their friends are, and then more people come on, and then more advertisers come on because that's where all the people are, and the whole thing builds itself this massive business model where technology actually inflates it, as opposed to saying if you're stuck in one of the industries where you're just facing that deflation and you just have to keep chasing it year after year. So I think certainly the stuff he's saying there, right on board with, and it's a big issue in terms of as we look at stocks, trying to work out where the path is and what the how long you can expect current earnings to go on for, and what types of R&D spends are required. I think the flip side is, though, the difference in opinion is this whole likely path. And so I think it's we're both in agreement that the effects of this on the macroeconomic outlook and what it's doing to the current system is the current systems are not set up to handle this constant, ongoing, and accelerating deflation that we're seeing. And so something needs to change. I think Jeff's view is, and actually I think as well, he certainly even acknowledges in his book that this is the interesting area that's up for debate, which is the reason why he's written the book, and he's got a website where you can go and discuss this and sort of argue the cases. But I guess my take on it is that inflation to me acts as a bit of a lubricant in the economic engine. You don't want too much of it, but you don't want too little as well, because of the reasons we're talking about in terms of all of a sudden it makes borrowing for to build new factories and build new capability. It can make that very unattractive, and it also turns that whole part about the work somebody did a few years ago is worth more than the person who's doing the same work today, and so it's that real the real part about a intergenerational fairness in terms of we've already got enough problems with older people are amassing a lot more assets, but then if you start saying as well that the work they did 10 years ago was worth twice what the work somebody else is doing today, then that just turns that into more of a problem. So I guess
doesn't incentivize the whole process, does it?
No, that's right. And so for me, it's about coming up with that whole inflation, that whole lubricant that you can put in there. That means that if nominal prices are going up year on year, it means that people can in bad industries can sit there with a flat salary for a few years before they decide to change industries, as opposed to having to force those people to take big pay cuts or just to fire the people much earlier if you've got deflation. So I guess the outcome is we've got differing views, but I think certainly in terms of the symptoms and the diagnosis, I think we're very much on par with what Jeff's thinking.
Fantastic. And fair to say that there'll be plenty more coming out on this issue as technology becomes further and further entrenched in the day-to-day lives of the world as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And coming up next week on the 13th of August, Thursday at 12:30, as always, we'll take a look at the future of financial advice with financial advisors and money coaches Tristan Schifo and Harry Goldberg from Purpose Advisory. And just to let you know, we will be actually pre-recording this on Friday, the 6th of August. So feel free to drop in any questions for the panel into our YouTube community tab, and we can discuss these with Tristan and Harry for you. We hope you've enjoyed today's show. If you'd like to see more of our content, head over to nucleuswealth.com/content. To stay up to date with news from us, follow us on social media. And we always appreciate guest or topic selections, so if you've got one, drop them in the comments of today's YouTube video. And finally, if you know someone who gets something out of today's episode, let them know about it, share it with some friends, and help our podcast grow. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you at the next one.